I call the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. If ever there was a time for someone to step up and lead this nation, it was the spring and summer of 2019-2020. And in fact, that is exactly what happened. But it wasn't the Prime Minister who led. The Prime Minister created a vacuum, and that was even before he decided to escape the smoke and disappear to Hawaii. He left the vacuum, and we all know that if there's a vacuum, someone will fill it, and they did. Let's look at a few of them. Greg Mullins, the former New South Wales Fire Chief. He and other fire chiefs, with their 100 of years of experience, stepped up. They stepped up nearly a year ago. They had used their perspective to identify that we may have been underprepared for a potentially dangerous and disastrous fire season. They were concerned about the capacity of emergency services to cope. They were concerned about the number of firefighting aerial facilities that we had, and they were concerned about our reliance on volunteers. They saw there was a need for things to change. They showed leadership. I heard my colleague, the member for Eden-Monaro, yesterday acknowledge that during these fires, the leader of the National Party reached out to him, and I have to say that the new National Party deputy stepped up and reached out to me. I think leadership means being willing to set aside self-interest and partisan politics to be able to address the very real issues that people face. Now, I'm not going to pretend that those problems have been solved yet, but the member for Maranoa was able to do something the Prime Minister and others have been incapable of, and that is to rise above party politics. That's leadership. And our own leader, the member for Grayndler, equally ditched the politics and stood side by side with people to hear about their experiences with these fires as firefighters and as survivors. It would have been easy to simply attack the Prime Minister, so easy, for his failures. But instead, we had a consistent, constructive voice, and our leader offered workable solutions and a willingness to welcome positive steps by the government, slow and small as they were, yet they were never acknowledged. I was very grateful that he understood and joined me and stood side by side with people as they went through possibly the most horrific fire season of their lives. That's leadership. At a local level, many others showed leadership. Mayors and state and federal members of parliament in fire-affected areas joined together, irrespective of politics, to support their communities. Many of them did this while their homes were under threat or their family members were facing their own personal fire traumas. They put their communities' interests ahead of their own. That's leadership. Our emergency services personnel showed leadership. They focused on the job. They did not seek to glorify their role. That's leadership. But the Prime Minister failed on every one of these measures. It extends to his inability to take responsibility for anything, his lack of judgment, his errors and his ignorance. You know, the sort of thing we teach our children is that you have to own your mistakes, you have to accept responsibility, and you have to be honest about it. The Prime Minister has failed on all those measures. I think one of the saddest things was the day the ad came out, when finally we had some action from the government to support our firefighters with ADF support and additional firefighting capacity. But the first thing that we saw of that was a flash ad linked to the Liberal Party donations page. That on a day when many people were facing catastrophic conditions, when potential Ember maps were showing huge swathes of New South Wales potentially under attack, we got an ad that really says it all. And the sad thing is, of course, we need leadership from the Prime Minister urgently. We can't afford to sit around and wait for another leader to come along, although who knows, we may not be waiting that long. Our need for leadership by this Prime Minister is urgent, and the thing he needs to lead on is action on climate change. He and Australia could show the world that we have learned from this summer. So let's be clear. This Prime Minister hasn't been missing in action just over spring and summer. He was missing long before then. And it's his character that has failed us. It's who he is, and we really shouldn't expect—
And I call the member for Ryan.